When rustlers hit the Double R Ranch that night, they thought they were dealing with ordinary cowhands. Old Tom was supposed to be just another ranch worker, quiet, harmless, past his prime. But as the bullets started flying and the young hands scattered, Tom's movements became something else entirely. Smooth, deadly, professional, like he'd done this dance 100 times before. Tom Wilson adjusted his weathered cowboy hat with calloused hands, his eyes scanning the distant cattle. Herd. For 15 years, he'd worked the Double R Ranch without causing trouble, never asking for more pay. Just kept his head down and did the work. But tonight was different. There was electricity in the air, the scent of danger. Uncle Tom, the cattle, look restless, young Cowboy Billy said with concern in his voice, like they're spooked by something. Tom raised his head, his experienced eyes surveying the surroundings. 40 years of hard living told him something was wrong. But he couldn't tell Billy about that. Nobody knew who Tom Wilson really was. Probably just a storm coming in, son, Tom muttered quietly. You head to the barn, check on the horses. Billy nodded and walked away. When Tom was alone, he rubbed the old scar on his forearm. The mark left by a Texas Ranger star still ached, especially before storms. Around midnight, Tom's worries became reality. The sound of horses came from the distance. Too many horses, approaching too fast. Cattle rustlers. Hands up. This is a robbery. The voices came from around the ranch house. Tom quietly slipped out of the barn, moving stealthily in the darkness. 6 mounted men had surrounded the ranch house, weapons drawn. Their leader, a large man with a red bandana, stood facing ranch owner Joe Morrison. We want all your money, Morrison. And we're talking the best of your cattle, too. Joe's wife, Sarah, stood behind him in fear. Billy and the other young cowhands were further back, unarmed and helpless. Tom's heart raced. He'd seen this scene before, too many times. And each time he'd faced the same choice: hide and live, or fight and maybe die. For 15 years, he'd hidden. But tonight, hey you, old cowboy, one of the rustlers had spotted Tom. Get over here. Put your hands up. Tom slowly raised his hands, but his steps were calm and measured. Just like old times. Just like back in his Dead-Eye Tom days. I'm just a ranch hand, Tom said quietly. Ain't got nothing that'll hurt you. The rustlers laughed. Then stay quiet and let us do our business. But Tom wasn't staying put. Slowly, without being noticed, he was moving closer to the ranch house. Every step was calculated, every movement. That of a warrior. Where's your money, Morrison? The leader was shouting. In the safe, in the house, Joe replied with a trembling voice. Tom was now close enough to the house. And he knew where Joe Morrison's old gun collection was kept. Behind the wall cabinet, Winchester rifles and Colt revolvers. Billy, Tom called out quietly. Get to the barn with the others. Now. Billy and the other young cowhands noticed the authority in Tom's voice. This wasn't the voice of an old ranch hand. This was someone giving orders. What are you doing? One of the rustlers asked. Noticing Tom's movements, Tom stopped. Just then, lightning struck and Tom's face was illuminated. And that expression. You boys are making a mistake. Tom spoke calmly but coldly. The folks who live on this ranch are under my protection. The rustlers looked at each other, then burst into laughter. You gonna protect them, old man? Who the hell are you? Tom smiled. For the first time in 15 years, that old smile. Names. Tom Wilson. But folks used to call me something different. He raised his voice. They called me Dead-Eye Tom. The rustlers' laughter died. Dead-Eye Tom. The name was familiar. Legendary bounty hunter, gunfighter who never lost. But he was dead, Impossible, the leader muttered. Deadeye Tom's dead. Everyone knows it. I was. Tom shrugged. But as you can see, death didn't take too well with me. With a sudden movement, Tom dove toward the ranch house door. The rustlers drew their guns, but Tom was already inside. Attack! The leader yelled "Dot" as bullets embedded in the house walls. Tom reached Joe Morrison's gun collection inside. Winchester rifle in hand, 2 Colt revolvers at his belt. He fired his. First shot through the window. One of the rustlers' hats flew off. "Warning shot!" Tom yelled. "Won't get another chance." But the rustlers weren't backing down. They kept shooting. Tom took a deep breath. 15 years of peaceful ranch life was over. Deadeye Tom was coming back. The second shot was right on target. Took one rustler in the shoulder, dropped him to the ground. Still the same marksman. Tom muttered to himself. The third and fourth. Shots knocked the weapons from 2 more rustlers' hands. Tom's aim hadn't gotten rusty. "Who the hell is this guy?" One of the rustlers screamed. "Deadeye Tom." The leader answered, fear in his voice. "The real Deadeye Tom. Retreat." But Tom wasn't going to let them retreat. These men had tried to hurt his family, because Joe Morrison's family had been his family for 15 years. He stepped out of the house, both revolvers in his hands. The old cowboy standing in the moonlight no longer looked like he used to. His posture was straight, his eyes like steel, his hands steady. "Now I'm going to give you a choice," Tom spoke coldly. "Either drop your weapons and surrender, or learn why they called me Deadeye." The leader pointed his gun at Tom. "You're just one old man. 6 against 1. Tom shook his head. "Not 6. 3. I wounded 2. One's got no weapon. That leaves 3. Indeed, Tom's count was accurate. And the remaining 3 rustlers were now scared. "Besides," Tom continued, "I ain't alone." At that moment, Billy and the other cowhands emerged from the barn. They had rifles in their hands, prepared according to Tom's directions. "This ranch is my home," Tom spoke one last time. "These people are my family, and nobody hurts my family." The rustlers were now completely surrounded. Tom's professional stance, Billy and the others' determination had left them helpless. "We surrender." The leader raised his hands. Tom lowered his weapons. Smart decision. As dawn broke, the sheriff came and took the rustlers away. Joe Morrison approached Tom. "Tom, so you really are Deadeye Tom." Tom nodded. "Used to be. But now I'm just Tom Wilson, oldest cowhand on the Double R Ranch." "Why didn't you ever tell us?" Tom looked at the distant cattle herd. "Because that life's over, Joe. I'm a different man now. But when my family's in danger, the old Tom comes back." Sarah Morrison approached Tom. "We owe you our lives." "Can't thank you enough." "No need, Mrs. Morrison." Tom tipped his hat. "This is what I do. Always have, always will." Billy asked curiously, "Uncle Tom, who was Deadeye Tom? Why were you so famous?" Tom smiled, this time an old, wise smile. "Long story, son. Maybe I'll tell it someday." But that night, sitting around the ranch fire, Tom Wilson began telling his story. Deadeye Tom's adventures, how he protected justice, why he retired. "People knew me for my fast gun," Tom said, looking into the fire. "But my real strength was knowing what was worth protecting. And this ranch, this family, they're worth protecting." The young hands listened in amazement. Joe Morrison nodded. "This story stays on the ranch. Nobody needs to know Tom Wilson is Deadeye Tom." "Much obliged, Joe," Tom replied gratefully. "I just want to be a peaceful cowboy. But when needed, the old Tom's always here." And from that night on, peace at the Double R Ranch was never broken. Because now everyone knew old Tom Wilson wasn't just a ranch hand. He was the legendary Deadeye Tom, and nobody under his protection would ever come to harm. Years passed. Tom aged, but those old skills never got rusty. And in that far corner of Texas, at the Double R Ranch, Justice always had a guardian. A guardian. Disguised as a ranch hand, but still carrying that old fire in his heart. The legend lived on in the quiet strength of a man who knew that sometimes the best way to protect peace was to be ready for war. Tom Wilson had found his place, not as a famous gunfighter, but as a protector of the people who'd become his family. And every sunset, as he watched over the cattle and the land he'd learned to love, Tom knew one thing for certain. Home wasn't a place you were born. It was the place you chose to protect. On the Double R Ranch, he'd made his choice. And Deadeye Tom Wilson would stand by it until his dying day. The news of last night's showdown traveled faster than wildfire across the Texas plains. By sunrise, ranch hands from neighboring spreads were riding in to get a look at the legendary Deadeye Tom. Some came with respect, others with challenges in their eyes. Tom was repairing fence posts when the first visitor arrived, a young hotshot named Danny Quick Draw Martinez from the Triple A Ranch. He wore his guns low and his confidence high. "So you're the famous Deadeye Tom," Danny called out, dismounting with exaggerated swagger. "Heard you put down some rustlers last night. Impressive, for an old-timer." Tom didn't look up from his work. "Just doing my job, son. Same as always." "Thing is," Danny continued, "I've been hearing stories about Deadeye Tom for years. How he was the fastest gun in Texas. How he never lost a draw. But looking at you now, well, you don't seem so fearsome." Billy and the other young cowhands gathered around, sensing trouble. Tom finally straightened up, his weathered hands still, holding the fence wire. "You got something on your mind, boy?" Danny's hand moved closer to his gun. "I'm thinking maybe those stories were just that. Stories. Maybe it's time for a new legend to be born." Tom sighed deeply. "Danny Martinez, right? Your daddy owns the Triple, huh? Good man, your father. Taught you to rope and ride, I'll bet. But he never taught you when to keep your mouth shut. How do you know I know everyone in this territory, son. Been here longer than you've been breathing. And I know your daddy wouldn't want to lose his only boy to prove something that don't need proving." The young cowboy's confidence wavered slightly. "You afraid to face me, old man?" Tom set down his tools and walked slowly toward Danny. Each step was measured, deliberate. The other ranch hands instinctively stepped back. "I ain't afraid of much anymore, Danny, but I am tired. Tired of young guns who think speed is everything. Tired of proving myself to boys who confuse reputation with wisdom." He stopped 10 feet from Danny, his stance casual but ready. "But if you insist on learning the hard way." The silence stretched like a taut rope. Danny's hand hovered over his gun, trembling slightly. Tom stood perfectly still, his eyes calm but alert. "Your call, son." Danny's nerve broke. His hand moved away from his weapon. This ain't over." "Yes, it is," Tom replied firmly. "Ride home to your daddy, Danny. Tell him Tom Wilson said hello. And maybe ask him to teach you something he obviously forgot, respect." As Danny rode away, Billy approached Tom with admiration. "How'd you know?" "He'd back down," Tom smiled. "Experience, Billy. Real gunfighters don't announce themselves. They don't need to prove anything. The ones who come looking for a reputation usually leave empty-handed." The ranch family deepens that evening. The Morrison family gathered around the kitchen table with Tom for the first time since he'd worked there. Sarah Morrison had prepared a special meal, her famous beef stew and cornbread. "Tom," Joe Morrison began, "I've been thinking about last night, about what you did for us. There's something we need to discuss." Tom looked up from his plate, concerned. "If this is about me leaving, Joe, I understand. Having Deadeye Tom around might bring trouble. Leave? Sarah interrupted. Tom Wilson, you're not going anywhere. This is about making you a partner. Tom nearly choked on his coffee. Partner? Joe nodded. We've been talking. You've worked this land for 15 years, protected this family, helped build this ranch into what it is. It's time you had a real stake in it. I don't know what to say. Say yes, Sarah smiled. We're family, Tom. Have been for years. Now, it's just going to be official. Billy jumped up from his chair. Does this mean Uncle Tom gets to boss us around now? Everyone laughed. Tom felt something he hadn't experienced in decades. Genuine belonging. I'm honored, Joe. Sarah? But you know what this means, don't you? If I'm a partner, if this is truly my home, then I'll protect it with everything I have. Joe extended his hand. That's all we've ever asked. The test of leadership 3 weeks. Later, Tom's new status was put to the test. A drought had hit the territory hard, and water rights became a source of conflict. The Baxter Ranch, a large operation upstream, had started damming the creek that fed the R and several smaller ranches. Tom rode out with Joe to meet with the other affected ranchers at the old Miller place. The mood was tense, angry voices, demanding action. We need to ride up there and tear down that dam, shouted Pete Miller, owner of the struggling Circle M. They got no right to steal our water and start a range war? Countered old Samuel Hayes from the Rocking H. The Baxters got more guns than all of us combined. Tom listened quietly as the arguments grew more heated. Finally, Joe Morrison spoke up. What do you think, Tom? You've seen range wars before. All eyes turned to Tom. He stood slowly, his presence commanding immediate attention. I have seen range wars, he began, and I can tell you they solve nothing. Good men die, families get destroyed, and the land suffers. So we just let them. Steal our water? Pete Miller demanded. No, Tom replied calmly. We handle this the right way. Legal way first, then if that fails, other measures. He outlined a plan. They would approach the territorial judge with their case, document their water rights, and demand legal action. But if the Baxters refuse to comply, I'll ride up there myself and have a conversation with Marcus Baxter. Samuel. Hayes shook his head. Tom, Marcus Baxter's got a reputation too. He's got hired guns, mean ones. Tom's eyes hardened. Then he'll understand the language I speak. A confrontation at Baxter Ranch 4 days later. Tom rode alone to the Baxter Ranch. He wore his best clothes, not the worn work gear of a ranch hand, but the clean, pressed attire of a man conducting serious business. Marcus Baxter was a big man with an even bigger ego. He met Tom on the front porch of his mansion-like ranch house, flanked by 2 gunfighters Tom recognized from wanted posters. Well, well, Baxter sneered. The famous Deadeye Tom. Heard you were working as a common cowboy these days. Partner. Actually, Tom corrected. Partner in the R Ranch, and I'm here about the dam. What about it? That creek runs through my land. I got every right to use my own water. Tom pulled out a rolled document. This here's a territorial survey from 1867. Shows that creek was designated as a shared water source for all ranches in this valley. Your daddy signed the agreement. Baxter barely glanced at the paper. My daddy's dead. I don't honor his agreements. Then you'll honor mine, Tom said quietly. Remove the dam by sunset tomorrow, or I'll remove it myself. The 2 gunfighters stepped forward, hands moving toward their weapons. Tom didn't flinch. You threatening me, old man? Baxter snarled. Just stating facts. The dam comes down. Peacefully or otherwise. Baxter laughed. You and what army? Tom mounted his horse, turning to face Baxter one last time. Don't need an army, Marcus. Just need to be right. And I am. The resolution the next evening. Just as the sun touched the horizon, Tom rode to the creek alone. The dam was still there, and Baxter's men were waiting. But Tom wasn't alone after all. As he approached the dam, riders emerged from the surrounding hills. Joe Morrison and Billy, the Hayes boys, Pete Miller and his sons, and a dozen other ranchers. They had come to stand with Tom. Faced with determined ranchers fighting for their livelihood, Baxter's hired guns lost their nerve. The dam came down without a shot being fired. That night, as water flowed freely again, Tom sat by the creek, reflecting on how much his life had changed. He was no longer a lone gunfighter living in the past. He was part of something bigger, a community, a family, a future. Billy approached with 2 cups of coffee. Uncle Tom, do you miss it? The old days? Tom accepted the coffee gratefully. Some parts, Billy. The excitement, the clear-cut good versus evil. But I wouldn't trade this for anything. This, Tom gestured toward the ranch, where lights glowed warmly in the windows, where Sarah Morrison was tending to injured cattle, where Joe was planning tomorrow's work. Home, son. I spent 40 years looking for it, and found it right here. The story of Dead-Eye Tom Wilson was far from over, but it had found its true beginning, not as a legendary gunfighter, but as a man who chose to build rather than destroy, to protect rather than pursue, to find his legend not in the speed of his draw, but in the strength of his character.